Good evening, I'm Edel Howlin. Welcome to Red, White and Blue. It's a wrap, well, at least for the regular term of the 85th Texas Legislature. The 140-day session came to a close earlier this week, and Governor Abbott has yet to announce a special session. Out of the 824 bills that reached Governor Greg Abbott's desk, 190 of them were signed into law. The heavily Republican legislature passed bills that included access to criminal history records, mental health resources for college students, and in the last few hours, Texas lawmakers came to a compromise on the state budget. But political watchdogs criticise that those same lawmakers failed to pass bills on major issues such as property tax reform and the Sunset Bill. So tonight we ask, what did lawmakers successfully accomplish for Texas this session? Which bills got away? This evening, to guide us through this conversation, we are pleased to welcome representing District 129, Representative Dennis Paul, and representing District 142, Representative Harold Dutton. And our host, David Jones, and filling in for Gary Pollan this evening, is the co-host of our podcast, Party Politics, Jay Iyer.
And Jay, thanks for being here for your Pollan. In fact, if you do such an amazing job, I will do everything I can to keep you.
Oh, well, I will try to do my best Gary Pollan impersonation, but a kinder, gentler version.
Gentler Gary.
Yeah.
So I think the only fair way to go about this is because Representative Paul, you were in the majority in the House. You were a representative of the majority, right?
That's correct.
Mr. Dutton, you were in the minority, right? So
in two ways.
in two ways, right? Why don't we start out by you saying, and limit it to three things, what you're most proud of that your majority passed in this session.
Well,
and then we can ask Harold the three things that he's most disappointed in, because he's probably got more disappointments than he does have anything else.
I think Harold would be happy with everything that we passed because we did a good job. I think the citizens of Texas should be happy with the majority of things that we did. We did pass a good budget. So we took SB 1 was a good budget that took care of our needs, gave us a balanced budget, funded the things that we needed to funded those things to adequate levels, and took care of stuff like the border protection things that were important to Texans. We also took care of our supplemental budget to take care of the things that we needed. We took care of the emergency items that the Governor Abbott had on his call, passing Senate Bill 4 for sanctuary city bills, as well as taking care of CPS situations and ethics that he wanted, and also an Article 5 convention. So I think we had quite a big plate full. I know I probably went over 3 there, but I could go through more.
Yeah, you went through. You did about 8. I don't know what Article 5 is. That's over my head. But Harold, you get to tell us whether or not A, you're unhappy with some of what Representative Paul said, or just give us your 3 major disappointments in the session.
Well, I think like most legislative sessions, this is my 17th session, by the way, and so it always depends on your perspective. When you talk about the budget, I voted against it. I don't think it nearly represented what Texans ought to be about in terms of its future. For example, it decreases spending on public education by about $200 a student in the state. I think that's the wrong way to go for Texas. It assumes that the $1.1 billion we reduced public ed spending by, that local taxpayers are going to pay for it. Now, we've been arguing seems like forever since I've been in the legislature, about what the role of state government ought to be in financing public education. And now we're going back the other direction. So I'm not at all.
Okay, there's the budget.
Thrilled about the budget. I could go on and on and on, but there are things in the budget. For example, we didn't fully fund Medicaid at all. We spent $800 billion down on the border.
Of course, the tariffs are coming from there. So Harold,
Well, yeah, but if I had a choice between that and what I want to spend it on, making sure that every kid had pre-K in the state, I think I'd choose to do the pre-K, because I'm more scared of having an uneducated populace than I am for some terrorists coming across the border, our southern border. Then the other thing, which I was most unhappy about, was this whole idea that we passed in the House for the first time a bill that would raise the age of juvenile criminal responsibility from 17 to 18. This is a law that hadn't been changed since 1918. I went back and did the research on it, and even then, it was designed only for juveniles who had misdemeanor convictions. not felony convictions. We passed that bill in the House by 92 votes. It goes to the Senate, and the Senate never even refers it to a committee, which was a source of a lot of animosity between the House and the Senate. But then I could go on and on. There's a bill I had, in fact, I just left court this morning, and it was a bill I had that came up this morning. And it was about a young man who was charged with resisting arrest. And the first question I had was, what was he being arrested for in the first place? And unfortunately, you don't have to know that. Unfortunately, nobody has to tell you that. And what I figured out is that we don't let police officers, well, we don't want to restrict police officers, and there's this huge divide in the legislature between what police officers want and what the community needs. There's a huge divide. I had a bill also that would have required more training for police officers. Nobody wanted to do that. What's interesting about that, though, is last year, 11 unarmed black males were killed in this state by police officers. 11. When last session, when we had a problem with police officers showing up at locations where they were called, and they would go out and there would be a dog on the site, the dog would come out and the police would kill the dog. So what did we do last session? We required police officers to have more training about when it came to going out on the scene and dogs show up. But this time, we didn't even do that.
So, Jay, I thought that the Sandra Bland Act was supposed to take care of some of these problems.
It didn't.
Senator Bland, were you unhappy with sort of the final the final product that came out?
Absolutely, because what the bill now assumes is that Sandra Bland had a mental problem, and that's what the problem was.
Right, but I mean, we have to acknowledge that we talk about this in Harris County a lot. The largest mental health facility in Texas is our prison system. So the idea of trying to get more. And this goes to sort of a larger question. This is something I want to address with you and Representative Paul, is this idea that we have to get everything in order for it to be a win. And I want to talk about in the context of property tax reform. Because if there is one issue that you talked about what many Texans talk about, and that's been, especially on the residential side, has been the escalating cost of home ownership in Texas as a result of property. What happened with property taxes? Why could we not get some relief for local taxpayers? Representative Paul, first you, and then Representative Dunn.
Well, obviously, the biggest part of that, a lot of those property taxes are going to local government. They're not our tax. So the big picture of it, it's not our tax. Although, due to this Robin Hood policy, where the state's been taking this property tax money into for school districts, it turns into that we have a statewide property tax. So the bottom impression is that. So where there's local governments getting these costs, and you mentioned the health care system, indigent care, which they have to provide, that their county government's always asking us to provide them some more sources for, which we don't have the money for, schools and things like that. So the biggest problem is dealing with a tax that's not our tax. So some of the solutions that been debated about was the one that the House passed was the transparency bill, just making sure you know everything that was on your tax bill and how to deal with it and where it was coming from and who was responsible.
That was Representative Bonham's bill, correct?
That was Representative Bonham's bill. Also, like you mentioned, Senator Betancourt had a rollback tax bill. I had a rollback tax bill as well, trying to set it at 6%. I think they originally were 4 and it leveled at 5 to say that, hey, if you go over 5%, you would have an automatic vote to say that you want to have more than that 5%. Interesting enough, going back through history, that rate in the past, through the years that this law has been in place, it was at 4%. Back in the 70s, when the inflation and everything was so bad, they raised that up to 8, and that's how you got to the 8. So it was all you were doing was be going back to what it was before. But that was a way to try to limit this. But I think there's going to be some big debates about how we should fund those programs or we would do it. I mean, I think sales taxes is the way that it needs to go, and then we could dramatically lower our property taxes and let that be a sales tax.
You see, Harold, now there's a man that's coming up with a revenue suggestion. You were saying that, we should be doing more with more money, and yet I didn't hear anything out of you that suggested that you had a revenue source.
Well, and to follow up on that, Representative Dunn, I wanted to ask you this question because in your district, the single biggest driver of people losing their homes. Poor people, minorities in particular, lose their houses because of escalating property taxes. Do Democrats do enough to talk about reducing property tax burden, particularly for homeowners? Was there a bill that you saw, sort of a Democratic alternative to what Representative Paul and Representative Bonin had put out there? Was there something out there that folks need to be aware of?
Well, I find it a little disingenuous that the legislature says they're proud of the budget and they want to do property tax reform, but the budget presupposes that property taxpayers in Texas are going to raise their taxes to pay for the cuts that we made in public education. That seems to me to be a little disingenuous. When you say that in my district people lose their house because of taxes, I think people lose their houses in my district because they don't have a job and they can't pay the taxes. I don't think it has to do with the amount of taxes that are paid.
But you would acknowledge that you've got homeowners with property tax rates that are far in excess. They pay more in property tax than they pay in a mortgage, for example.
Well,
That may be so, but you know that the tax rate right now is as low as it was in 1987. The
Right,
city,
but the rate
the
only
city tax
matters.
rate.
But the rate only matters if the property is valued. It
Well,
doesn't keep
well, let me
automatically
just-
going up.
And people
let me
want
say
their
this.
value to property go
Right.
up.
let
That's
me
why
say
it's
that
as good as
double it.
investment.
the problem in my district is that government's not responsive at all.
Right.
I mean, that what we get for our tax dollars is not the same as what people get on the other side of town get. That's what the problem is for us, for many
I
of
don't
us.
see I don't see anybody in my district getting anything more out of government
Well,
than they do in yours. In
well,
fact,
I tell you
local
what, if you
government
look
we
at-
get far less.
Well,
We
if you
don't
look
get-
at the
we don't
schools,
get-
you look at the schools in
No,
your
we don't
district
get
versus
nothing
my
else to-
schools. You look at the-
HISD probably spends a lot more money than CCISD. We don't get nothing from the city, no libraries, no schools, no hardly any police. In fact,
Well-
even in the last time, going back just in city budgets, the last time I think my district, the capital improvement money was $0.
Well,
Where
yeah,
in
but-
the other part of the city, it was dramatically improved. So there's no government's being more responsive to my district than yours, and I can guarantee you that.
Well, I would disagree with you, and I would be willing to share that with you, and I'll give you a tour of my district so you can see what I'm
I would
talking
be glad
about.
to do that, too.
Because I want you to understand. For example, look at the schools in my district. One of the problems you've got, obviously, I think Representative Paul mentioned this, the recapture problem. The recapture problem in HISD is basically caused because we created charter schools in 1993. In 1995, we created this whole recapture thing, it's just the opposite. We created the charter schools in 93, and then we created this whole recapture thing in 95. Now, the problem for us in HISD is that 35,000 students who live in HISD's district go to charter schools. When that happens, what happens is the way they calculate the wealth per student is they subtract out the kids that go to charter schools. And so 35,000 students out of our equation results in HISD now having to be a Chapter 41 school where they're going to now have to pay into the state's budget. But even that is a problem because what it presupposes is that the state said it was going to pay for charter school students. But it turns out the local districts are actually paying for the charter school students. And so that's what I think is part of the problem. Now, back to the budget itself. Again, the state sits there, and we have almost $12 billion, I think, in the rainy day fund or something thereabout. I find it difficult to understand how there are needs that are going unmet in this state, and we want to beat our chest about being able to have a savings account of some $12 billion. I just find that
Representative
terrible.
Paul,
The intent of that, it's an economic stabilization fund. It was a good piece of legislation created back in the 80s where they would take this tax money that was coming in during the good times and save it and spend it on the bad to plug the holes in the budget when you have bad. So if we just start taking that money and funding education out of that, then the people that are paying that tax would be saying, why am I paying for school twice? This tax is specifically set aside to do this purpose, and that's what it should be used for.
So the rainy day fund was designed, I guess, for one-time occurrences, right? Non-recurring expenditures.
Non-recurring expenses or short the budget when it was short.
So do I mean, you supported HB 100, I guess, that the bill that the House's version of education reform. Were you a? I'm sorry.
HB 11.
HB, yeah.
21.
Yeah,
21.
yeah, we got to get these numbers. That's right. HB 21, the Dan Huberty bill.
Yeah,
you supported that. So were you in favor of the 1.5 billion that was added in?
I supported that to have a discussion on finance, as well as the fact that it did reduce dramatically a lot of the money out of the recapture. Those are the two benefits that I saw out of it. I didn't see it being a reform package that I really wanted to see. More discussion on really changing. In fact, I filed a bill the last 2 sessions that the formula funding should cover insurance. Why should we on the coast pay 10 times more for insurance than somebody does in the center part of the state, and then yet I'm sending them my local tax dollars to the state to cover their expenses, and my expenses at 10 times or more for covering insurance is not covered. And I filed that bill the last 2 sessions, and I haven't even got a hearing on that either. So I think that would be some real reform to look at how we could do it. So I didn't think it was good enough reform, but it was good to have a discussion. I would have liked to have had the discussion on the education savings accounts.
How much of what was not done in this legislative session was as a result of the feud between the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House? And the Speaker of the House was openly dismissive of Senate leadership, quite often in the Houston Chronicle anyway. And I know a Chronicle doesn't necessarily. That's not his first read.
No,
but
no, second or third either.
Yeah.
but I, let me say this: we this session was really tied to what happened between the last session and this session. We in Texas, like we did every place, a lot of places rather, we spent that whole period of time scaring the hell out of people. Scaring people because of, first of all, immigrants. We spent the whole period so that somehow or another we'd all be scared of each other, and people coming across the border were going to be the huge problem. Then we spent a good bit of time talking about bathrooms, about who is going in and out of what bathrooms. Again, we're scaring people, and as a result of that, then we figure that we got to go to the legislature and respond to the fear that you've created.
I don't think it's a fear by anybody other than
hold on,
the
I'll let you
citizens of
talk.
Texas.
Hold on. I'll give you a chance to talk. I'm giving you my opinion. Now, my opinion, my perspective may be different than all other 149 members of the House, but this is my opinion. My opinion is that, look, if you want to look at Texas for tomorrow, it makes you do some things today that will get you there. Because the one reality is this, is Texas is becoming a state where the people are going to be the people more of color. If we don't do something, if you talk to any of the demographers who tell you that, look, if we don't do something about the level of education, for example, that we have in this state, based on the population of tomorrow, Texas is going to be in trouble. I will also add this to it. One of the things I was most upset about is the education of black male students in this state. In 35 states, black males happen to be at the bottom educationally, and nobody does anything about it. Nobody says anything about it. Nobody recognizes it. But in 35 states, that's the case. And if you go anywhere and you said, as I do, pose the question, give me the demographics related to race and gender of who's at the bottom educationally. Everybody says black males. Everybody. I haven't found one person that didn't tell me that. And yet I say, well, what do we do about that? What are we doing? I had a bill that would have attempted to do something about it that said, look, what we're going to do is, if you have 1,000 or more black males in your school district, your whole accountability system will be based on the progress of black males. And my thing is that if we don't do something about the education levels in this state, yeah, we can feel comfortable that we didn't spend the money out of the ESF. But my point is this, is that do we have needs that are yet unmet in the state?
Such as special education
Absolutely.
student.
Right. So
Absolutely.
let's let Representative Paul sort of talk about this. So the governor put the sanctuary cities issue on the call That was the initial, sort of as part of his initial emergency. What did you think about it? I know you supported it. Talk us through from your perspective as to why you think it was important to support it.
Well, I don't think anybody was out scaring people, but I think it was something that the citizens of Texas did want to ensure that the violence that is coming across the border that is taken care of. You know, it's not going to be going out and rounding up people or whatever. If you commit a criminal activity, you would have to know if you're also an illegal alien during that criminal activity. And in fact, all we're really doing is saying local governments will enforce state and federal laws. Federal law requires all local law enforcement to do this. All we had was that cities were saying, I'm going to ignore the federal law and just do this on my own. All we're doing is saying, we don't want to ignore federal law. We want you to follow state and federal law when you're doing your job.
And this is called, is it not, Jay, a show me your papers bill?
Well, that's the back half. That's the back half of that bill, and I wanted to talk to you about it. Your district is you have a growing minority population, about 25% Latino. Clear Creek ISD is one of the fastest growing districts and has a larger Latino population now. Are you at all concerned about that element of it? Are you concerned the potential for abuse that might occur?
No, not really. I mean, I don't see how it's going to be abused. You know, if you're doing criminal activity, they'll look into it. So I don't see how it's going to be abused or that. So I trust what our law enforcement are doing. I know Harold's got some other issues there, and I respect that. But I don't see it going to be abused or, you know, would be a problem.
Well, the problem with it, from my perspective, is the bill started out as a bill that would be applied after you were arrested. What it became was a bill that applies even though you're just detained.
Would you have supported it if it was just as it originally came out?
I doubt that I would have supported it then, but I think it would have been far better in terms of its application, and you would not have had so much angst in terms of that community, because the problem is that now you can be detained just because you happen to be walking down the street.
You have to have a reason to detain you.
Well, you know, you have to have a reasonable suspicion.
Walking down the street wouldn't be a reasonable suspicion.
I'll take you to my neighborhood and show you where that happens. Okay, since you don't know that happens, I will take you to my neighborhood and I'll walk down there and I'll bet you, I'll get stopped. Okay. I mean, I just left court.
Harold, I know you've spoken a lot on this. I understand what you're saying.
Because the problem is this, and this has always been the problem, is that the application of these laws to my community and representing Paul's community sometimes is a little bit different. And I understand that. But that's why I think that when it comes to detaining somebody, you have to be quite, I mean, it made a lot of difference when the bill was changed to that.
Representative Paul, we're going to give you sort of the last word on this issue. Tell us, I mean, what could have happened that would have made everyone, I think, sort of cut some of the tension, some of the issues there. Was there a way to sort of bring folks together on this?
No, I don't think they would ever accept it. Y'all asked Harold here, who was not one of the very mean-spirited vocal persons on this bill, you know, that he wouldn't have supported this even with the language that first came out of committee in the House. So I don't think, no matter what we could have done, could have got people on the other side of the aisle to say, let's support this bill.
Somebody described the fight at the end of the legislative session whenever there was not only a great number of people making a lot of noise, but then you had members actually fighting on the House floor. Describe that and the motives for some of that tension.
It got started. I mean, at least what happened initially was the gallery, the House gallery, where the public generally sits and invited to sit and watch the proceedings. A number of people came and it was full. I mean, there was absolutely people everywhere. Most of them had on red shirts and that kind of thing. And they were chanting about SB 4. There were some people who had signs even, wanting to put signs up. Well, one, you can't have signs in the chamber. You can't disrupt the proceedings in the chamber, but they were doing all of those. So the speaker at that point in time had everybody removed from the House gallery. As that was happening, people were shouting, and there were 3 or 4 Hispanic legislative members, you know, basically not
goading them on.
Not goading them, but at least letting them know there was somebody who understood what they were saying, is the way I took it. One member then came over from the Republican Party and and
Right.
said something ugly.
Well, I apologize, but we are unfortunately out of time, so that cliffhanger of a story is going to have to hold. But guess what? We're
Well,
not going to have a
come
fight
back.
here because
You can come back.
we've got two great representatives. Thank you, Representative
Thank you
Paul.
very much.
Thank you,
Well,
Representative Dutton.
Thank you.
It's always a
Thank
pleasure
you.
to
Thank
serve
you.
and work with this
Thank you.
gentleman.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for having us. Edel, thank you.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you, David. Do you have a story idea for an episode of Red, White and Blue? Please share it. We would love to hear from you. Submit your comments on Facebook and on Twitter at RWB_8. And be sure to check out Jay on his political podcast, Party Politics, with co-host Brandon Roddinghouse. You can download it at houstonpublicmedia.org/party or anywhere podcasts are available. Thank you and have a great evening.